So we got a bit of a shift to carry out here. So I'm hoping that while I try and while that shift happens, that we can have Glenn O'Brien, Michael Holman, Ann Magnuson, Patti Astor, Johnny Dynell, Fred Brathwaite. I'm hoping you're all in the house. Can you make your way up, please? Michael, did I not mention Michael? I thought I did. Michael. Yeah, I did. You know who you are. Come up on stage. So while our esteemed celebrity star guests are settling in, I'll just say a few quick words to introduce. So first of all, thanks to Ron and Sophie and to MoMA for supporting this event. You've been absolutely fantastic. And not every gallery, I know of some, are not quite so supporting of this culture, so we're really grateful. Thank you very much. Thanks in particular to Maripol and to Glenn and also Michael Zilka, who I know put a huge amount into this film, for encouraging the screening tonight, making it happen. It's absolutely fantastic. I do need to say a quick word of thanks to Duke University Press for supporting me through my sheer madness and writing these books that I write. This new one wasn't supposed to happen at all in the way that it did, but they permitted me to write 600 pages covering just 4 years, and that in itself was sort of barely enough to kind of cover all of the action that was going on in downtown and New York City during this extraordinary period in the city's history. The idea now is very much to forget the book and to do a bit of what the book does, quite incessantly, I hope, which is talk to the people who made this amazing scene happen and ask them about what was going on. I would like to have I did interview. I'd like to have brought up on stage 130 people, but that wasn't going to be possible. So I'm just delighted. Those are the number of people who I interviewed for the book. But I'm really, really delighted to welcome the 6 who we're going to try and squeeze in to discuss the screening, the Downtown 81, and also the wider downtown New York City party culture of this period. I think it's probably going to be overwhelming and chaotic, and we are only going to skim the surface, but that really is the point. So I'd like to welcome Glenn O'Brien, a writer and producer of Downtown 81 and creator of TV Party. I'd like to also welcome Michael Holman, a member of the band Grey and hip-hop impresario. I'd also like to welcome Ann Magnuson, organizer-in-chief at Club 57 and downtown performer, actor. Also to Patti Astor, downtown film star and the co-owner of the Fun Gallery. Johnny Dynell. Johnny made it down from the bar, excellent. DJ at the Mud Club, Pyramid, Danceteria area, and also to Fred Brathwaite, sometimes better known as Fab Five Freddy. Graffiti artist, MC, and I think we can maybe describe you, but in a way we could describe many of you in this way as connector-in-chief, because so much of what was going on downtown was about people making connections with each other. I also should just kind of add that I could have introduced everyone here really as a scenester, because everyone was throwing themselves into this scene. It was a scene that was kind of happening at night, but also during the day, as we saw in the film. A lot of it happened on the street, but an awful lot of it happened in party culture, and it was really about the kind of throwing oneself into this situation which made the late 1970s, and in particular the early 1980s, what it did, I think. Glenn, as a writer and producer of this extraordinary film that we've just seen, I'm wondering if we can start to you. Could you tell us about the genesis of the film, how it came about?
Well, it's not exactly the way you put it in your book. I read part of your book.
Oops.
We were, Ado and Mary Paul and I were hanging out with Elio Fiorucci, who was running the hippest sort of department store in New York. And Mary Paul was his employee. And Elio loved to go out. He loved to be with younger people. and chase younger girls and take younger drugs. And so one night he said, you know, it's so marvelous what's going on here. You kids should make a movie. And we all said, yeah, that's a good idea. Why didn't we ever think of that? So he said that if we had a treatment that maybe he could raise the money. So there was no script written by Mary Paul, by the way, that I rewrote. I wrote a treatment. The money people who are now they're probably all out of jail by now, from Rizzoli came up with some money for us to, well, I wrote a script, and then and the script was basically, I mean, I didn't want to make a film that was a documentary, you know, it said, and the dream became a reality. I thought, let's just play a sort of version of ourselves and do a version of what we do, but like slightly exaggerated. So that's kind of it. You know, that's sort of a day in the life. I don't know if Michael ever got tied up, but that was kind of an exaggerated, you know, day in the life of all of us.
Can I ask you again, Glenn? I mean, so much of this culture was ephemeral culture. It was part of that. It was culture that happened at night. It wasn't going to be recorded. Did you have a sense in the midst of all of this that this was an ephemeral culture and that this film was a way to document it?
I guess so. I mean, I think that we all thought we were going to be big stars that would be swept up by Hollywood. Only Ann Magnuson was swept up by Hollywood. But yeah, I mean...
And washed ashore.
The funny thing is that to me, everyone in this film was a star in some way or another. Like Marshall Chest, the thief, was the president of the Rolling Stones record company. And the cab driver, Yella, that was Jimmy Destry of Blondie. Everybody was somebody. So it was kind of a gathering of the semi and almost famous.
Michael, if I could turn to you, you were close with Jean. I mean, I think Jean-Michel was maybe friendly with everyone on who's up on this panel. He seemed to be that kind of guy, and it was also that kind of scene. But could you tell us a bit about your friendship with Jean-Michel, the formation of Grey, and also what was happening around Jean-Michel's life when this film came along?
Well, it kind of goes back, funny enough, to my first meeting Fab Five Freddy. And I just want to say, everybody, if I can, take a digression, and everybody on this stage has like influenced my life incredibly, and I just want to thank all of you. Really, it's an amazing collection of people up here. As far as, it's funny, Fab Five Freddy and I, Fred and a guy named Stan Pescott, we put together a party called the Canal Zone Party, and at that party, it was really the first time that the downtown scene and the uptown scene, if you want to call it that, in hip-hop and fine art world downtown sort of rubbed shoulders, and Jean was not going to be left out, and he showed up, and we gave him the opportunity to put a big tag together on a photo paper, and at that party, we met, and for the first time, I think, Fred, you met him for the first time as well, and Jean offered to start a band right then and there. I was like, yeah, of course, you know, and we started what became Grey, which was called many other things before that, Test Pattern, Bad Fools, what else was it, Test Pattern, sorry, what? Channel 9, yeah, Channel 9. And we just, the goal was to, you know, everybody had a band then, you know, all the artists, everybody was in a band or, you know, was making film, making music, making paintings, and this whole idea of this license that Warhol gave us, which was, you know, that you can do anything you want all at the same time, was something that we all, you know, embraced passionately. And so even though Jean was working on his paintings and working on his drawings and everything else, he decided he had to have a band as well because, Robert Longo and, Jim Jarmusch and I mean, everybody was in a band, at that time, I mean, Ann Magnuson, I mean, we all had bands. And so, but our particular angle was we wanted to create sound and noise and music that was beautiful and came from a really raw, innocent place, ignorant place, ignorant of the kind of instrumentation and musicality. So if you knew how to play music, you couldn't be in the band. And we just approached our instruments as if, we were aliens from another planet, trying to figure out how drum played, and I'd pull masking tape off of it, and Jean would play a guitar with a file, and we just had that kind of sense of freedom, and that the scene that you saw in the film, that the scene offered, it was just that sense of freedom, and we could do whatever we wanted.
Patti, you also were close with Jean-Michel, and the film kind of captures so much about what was going on in downtown New York in this period. There was the kind of the art punk scene, but then there was this kind of encroachment, if you like, and co-mingling and co-flourishing with graffiti. Could you tell us a bit about meeting Jean, your friendship with Jean, but also the role that you came to play in kind of bringing together this kind of no-wave art punk side of downtown with what was initially kind of the graffiti culture from Uptown and Brooklyn, and kind of made that happen together? Patti?
So that's fascinating.
I hope you don't need me to repeat that question.
No. Well, I have to say that when I met Jean-Michel, I met Jean-Michel on the stairs going up to the VIP room of the Mud Club. It kept going up and up, and he was a young kid then. It was 1977, and I didn't know who he was. I just knew he was some homeless kid, and I always just teased him about his weird hairdo and tried to flirt with him. In terms of the Fun Gallery, and I wrote a book about the Fun Gallery, and I do have some copies with me tonight. It's a very limited edition, so if you're interested, I do have copies. I always say that the day that I started the Fun Gallery was the day I met Fab Five Freddy, because there was a very heavy punk scene at the time, and this is 1980, I believe, and it's incredible to think about, but at that time, no one had heard of breakdancing, graffiti, rap music, DJing, and we didn't really see that culture that much because we never took the train. We mostly just ran around wild in the East Village. But I had a movie that was playing called Underground USA, which is kind of the wild style version of the Mud Club, because it was directed by Eric Mitchell. It is in the collection of the Modern. And we were so broke that we couldn't, rent sets or anything. We shot in the Mud Club when it was open, so that's pretty cool. And it was running as the six-month midnight hit at the St. Mark's Cinema, which it turned into a Gap. That's when I split. But now it's not even a Gap anymore, so I don't know what's happening. Eric Mitchell and I used to put on disguises and go sneak down and see how long the line was at the movie theater. So one night after staying out at the Mud Club till 5 a.m., the poet-philosopher Duncan Smith, who is no longer with us, had a typical downtown party. It was the 100th birthday of Stephen Mallarmé, and he was serving vodka and cucumber sandwiches. And I noticed this mysterious stranger, dark face with a pork pie hat and black Ray-Ban sunglasses. And Duncan had a birthday cake, of course. And Fred came up to me. So Fred decides it's time to bring hip hop to the world. And he says, I think I might go down and check out this East Village spot and see. So him, Futura, and a couple of the other guys, I think Zephyr and Kylie, went to see Underground USA. Futura later told me, he said, I didn't get that movie, I just fell asleep. And so Fred came up to me and said, Patti Astor, you're my favorite movie star. He put out a little paper plate and said, can I have your autograph? And I said, well, certainly, you must be my new best friend. And that's just what he turned out to be. And after that, hip-hop just exploded. And the punk rock, I think the thing that was really cool about the punks were all making themselves up, all the characters and everything, and running around. And the hip-hop guys were all making themselves up and running around. So it worked out fine.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary meeting. It was this kind of these two communities realizing they shared exactly the same aesthetic set of priorities around cut-up and collage and the reuse of found objects, and but had grown up in completely different parts of town. It was quite extraordinary. And if I can turn to you, there's no real order to this. And I think the film captures this very powerfully. It was there was this sense of all these different people coming from all these different places, and somehow finding a home in downtown during this period, and in this extraordinary way, a way that is rarely credited historically. I think it was party spaces, these places that are often looked down upon, that became the home for DJing, for live music, but for all of these different art forms and art itself. You in your role at Club 57 played an absolutely central role in this, but we also saw the Mud Club, the Peppermint Lounge, and Pyramid would open soon afterwards, Danceteria, of course. And in one of our interviews, I think you described as downtown as being like Halloween every night. I was wondering if you could kind of, reflect on what it was like living in New York during this period and being able to enjoy Halloween every night.
Well, it wasn't always enjoyable. What struck me about the film was that it really captured the meandering, aimless quality that was actually something that I don't think we get anymore, because everybody's so connected to their devices and they're so reachable, and you could really get lost back then, and certainly it was very cheap, and I think that anyone who moved down there had to be crazy, really, and very courageous, because it was dangerous, and certainly for some of us little white girls from suburban West Virginia, but it had the sense of excitement and danger, but also freedom, and that sense of that you could kiss a bag lady and she would turn into, that didn't literally, and it was Debbie Harry. Or it was Jack Smith, or it was, when I first got to the East Village, I would see Patti Smith walking around. I followed her once and touched her hair, and then ran away. And I'd see the New York Dolls walking around, like Jerry Nolan or Johnny Thunders, and it was just like, oh my God, these are my heroes that I watched or grew up in high school wanting to come to New York and be an artist and have that kind of freedom to not live a 9-to-5 job, and met most of my cohorts at CBGB's and Max's and a lot of other, like Squat Theater was this amazing place on 23rd Street with these Eastern European avant-garde theater folks like Richard Foreman and just people waving their freak flag high and not thinking about getting a job if you didn't want a job. You could live on $5 a day, and then I met Tom Scully and Susan Hannaford at CBGB's, and I know that they held a lot of salons, and there are all these different groups of people that it's impossible that no book could cover all of these people, and certainly the Club 57 show that's going to be at MoMA next year, we hope to be very inclusive of everybody who, Tom and Susan had a great deal to do with creating that scene, as well as people like Andy Reese and Peter Quailoff, who passed away, many people who passed away, but that you could walk around the streets. I remember running into Jean and asking him over for coffee, because I was so into coffee. I discovered Cafe Bustelo, which I thought, that was my drug of choice. Like, forget speed, Cafe Bustelo is it. And he came over and he drew on the refrigerator this incredible hieroglyphic with the hangman, and then we had coffee, and then I said, okay, well, I have to And I found out later he got mad because he thought I was asking him over to have sex. And I was just, again, a dumb little chick from West Virginia, like, let's have coffee and just talk about art. Okay, you can go away now, and I'm going to... And then my boyfriend at the time, who is here tonight, he came home, saw the graffiti, and was so angry, because I guess men think a certain way. That locker room talk, you know.
Marking his territory.
And he screamed at me. I know he's apologized since. He made me clean it off.
Oh.
And I was crying for hours, and I had to go out and get turpentine, and I remember washing the whole thing off. So there went my $24 million. Except I left Peter, and he would have had the refrigerator, so Peter, you fucked yourself. There, mwah.
I also just want to say a quick thank you to Danny Johnson for DJing tonight. Thanks, Danny. Unfortunately, I was signing books, so I didn't get to dance at all, so that was a bit of a downer, but you know, it was fun. I could hear the sounds, and it was just a fantastic selection. Johnny, we're into DJing here. We see some DJing in the film. It's impossible, you know, to cover everything that was going on in a 600-page book, so clearly you're not going to cover everything in a film that barely lasts an hour, but we do have some DJing in the film, and it's one of, you know, many wonderful scenes. And yet there was kind of one of the most notable things about this period, this kind of post-CBGB period, effectively, and it begins in a sense with the Mud Club. It carries on with Club 57. It gets, you know, and with Danceteria, with Pyramid, all these other clubs. Is that there were all these punks who were almost forbidden from dancing at CBGB, and they start to get a little bit frustrated about this. And we see this explosion of DJing in all of these venues that almost always have live bands, but also DJing. And Johnny, you may have DJed in more of these spots than anyone else, I think, possibly. I almost kind of lose track. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about the role of the DJ in this period? I mean, for example, I remember when we were doing our interview, and you said about getting your first job at the Mud Club, and it was being a DJ was almost the same status as working behind the bar, but DJs go on to become these integrators as much and as significant as anyone else on the scene, it seems to me.
Well, I think, of course, we didn't know it at the time, but there was a whole new generation of DJs, you know, Anita Sarko and Mark Hamons and Justin Strauss and Sean Cassette and me. And, you know, we didn't know it at the time, but we were sort of the second generation of DJs, like in the whole broader sense of the scene. We were the second generation, where the first generation, basically Tim's Love Saves the Day book, those DJs were the first generation, and they were inventing DJing. They were inventing it as an art, where with my generation, we took it for granted that it was an art form. So we could sort of take it to a new place. And it was, as you said, post-punk. So we had this kind of punk sensibility, and we could, you know, take it into a whole other place. It was a kind of a generational thing. And it's not like we were rebelling against the older generation, because that's not it at all. I mean, we grew up, I mean, I did anyway, I mean, listening to Larry Levan and David Mancuso and going to Better Days and even Zanzibar and all these clubs. So that was sort of who I was. So for me to take it another step, I had that as the background. So I think for us, the kind of songs that generation discovered, those songs that they played for the first time, those were classics for us. And they were our mentors. They were, you know, had a lot of respect for them. And you know, as I said, at the time, I don't think we realized what we were doing, but we were taking it to, you know, another place. There was a space between what they did and what we did. And I think it's also really important to understand our whole scene, I mean, our whole sensibility, you have to understand the concept of camp. Especially what Ann
Say
did.
that wearing the suit you're wearing?
Yes, exactly.
Get serious.
But if there's got to be a space between like the original thing and then what you do. There's a little space, and you could do it as a thing where the maybe the original DJs were really offended by the Ethel Merman disco album or Disco Duck or something like that. We could and did actually play that stuff as camp. We weren't offended by it. We thought it was funny and could actually play it. But there's got to be that space. It's like, Marilyn Monroe was a beauty, and she was truly an original. But when Debbie, in the 70s, sort of did Marilyn as kind of a tongue-in-cheek, campy punk thing, that's camp. It's like there's another generation. Sort of like then when Madonna does Debbie, that's stealing. I mean, it only goes one generation. Debbie doing Marilyn, okay, but Madonna doing, and then the kids now doing Madonna doing, that's just sad. But anyway.
Hey, we want this to be intergenerational. We want this to be intergenerational, okay?
Did that make sense?
It did. Thank you. Fred, when I was having conversations with Ron and Sophie about what film we were going to show tonight, we could have equally gone with Wild Style. This and Wild Style and Downtown 81 are sort of the great films of the era. So thank you for that.
I saw Charlie walking out before the film started, so.
What's interesting to me, and hopefully not only to me, is the way that hip-hop wasn't a word in circulation at the beginning of 1980, and you enter the scene a little bit before 1980 and start going to the Mud Club. You're working with Glenn on TV Party and all of this stuff. You've got a fantastic cameo in the film. Thank you for that. You bring graffiti with Jean and with Michael and with others to downtown. Somehow it seems to me that hip-hop takes shape downtown. Could you, and it takes shape in this place of convergence where people are open to the idea of discrete art forms coming together and forming an unusual synergy. Could you speak to us about that?
Yes, I can speak to that. And I guess, a kid in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and I was just, consumed with a lot of information. And, as a kid growing up, the whole idea of DJing, DJs going back into the 70s, bringing their sound systems out into the street was something that, I look forward to and followed closely. I had older relatives that went to, I think, Better Days, and but there was a whole other group of mobile DJs that I, would play in Brooklyn. The guys that really were the ones that made it really popular in the streets that would then lead to what we know of as hip-hop, inspire the guys in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. So I was watching these things come together, and I took part, go to block parties, wrote my name on the wall, and stuff like that. And as I began to stumble upon some magazines and articles talking about, punk rock and this revolutionary kind of new music and the Sex Pistols, and I remember, reading an article in the New York Times about that. It was really exciting, and I began to make these connections that there was a similar energy between what I saw developing in the streets and that kind of rebellious punk energy. And so I was just, reading articles and zines and stuff like that. And luckily for me, I became a fan of Interview magazine. I became very curious about other visual artists like Andy Warhol. And then when I began to read Interview, I really became a big fan of Glenn O'Brien's Beat, which was Glenn's music column. And I actually learned a lot about music because Glenn, years later when we became friends, and I always consider him a mentor because I didn't know anybody, and Glenn said, come on, let's be a part of this. And I remember asking Glenn, like, what is it about your articles? And you write about punk rock, reggae, dance hall reggae, funk, soul, like really authoritatively as he would listen to these records and dissect them. And I'm like, wow. And I'd listen to the records and I'd hear these cool things he would point out. And I remember one day I said, Glenn, what kind of critic are you? I mean, I really enjoy reading, but I'm trying to understand what it is that makes you different. He says, well, Fred, I only write about music that I like. And it made sense as opposed to somebody that said, oh, I'm going to write about this album, but I'm going to tear it apart. So it was good. And Glenn invited me into that world, and I had these ideas that I was developing about these kind of wild elements coming from the streets of New York that had no real kind of form. They were just these wild elements, kind of like a freestyle thing. And I talked to Glenn about all this, and he had great advice and great ideas and invited me to be a part of Glenn O'Brien's TV Party, which is where I would become immersed in the extremes of intellectual, downtown, radical, subversive culture. And it was incredibly fun, and it was all new and improved. And, Glenn would introduce the show and say, this is a TV show that's a cocktail party, but could be a political party. And it was all very kind of fun, but it was also like, we were the little rascals in a basement, just making stuff up as we went along. And it was like, okay, let's do it, and we did it. And so these ideas, Glenn embraced these ideas, this new music. He was very curious about it. I met Chris Stein, Debbie Harry from Blondie, and just about everybody else, and they were all very receptive and open, and thus began the journey, you know what I'm saying? Like meeting cool people, sharing ideas, and figuring out how to make more cool, subversive stuff. And that's what we did.
We took Fred downtown, but he took us uptown. And one night, we went up to the Police Athletic League, and I think Grandmaster Flash was playing. And Debbie was there, and we were coming in, and it was a big crowd scene. And when I walked by, these kids said, "Look, it's Clark Kent." and they looked at Debbie and said, "And Patty Duke." Patty Duke was a big thing then.
Yeah, it was a big TV show way back. And
it was a dance step.
It was a dance at that point, the Patty Duke, the kids that the reruns would play. And so it became a dance where kids in the Bronx were mimicking the way Patty Duke danced. It became this hot dance. So here's this white chick coming into this party at the PAL, which is like a police athletic league. That was like a place where kids could just go and play basketball and stuff, and they turned it into a place to give shows at night. And that was it. That was the beginning.
I always got Buddy Holly.
So Michael, you came into this whole kind of fermenting kind of moment of hip hop. I mean, the word starts to kind of, the ideas seems as a cohesive culture seems to begin in 1980. You become the first writer, I believe, who kind of puts those two words, if they are even two words, I'm not sure sometimes, down in print and interestingly a piece that you wrote in the East Village Eye. But all of this also comes about not only through your engagement with Fred, but also your engagement with the kind of wider downtown party scene and Malcolm McLaren, I believe.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say that I don't know if I would have accomplished any of the things I had done in hip-hop culture if I hadn't been introduced to it by Fab Five Freddy, my very good friend. And I don't know that Gray would have had half the attention and success if Glenn O'Brien hadn't put us up at the Mud Club, at Rock Lounge, at so many different places. And I don't know if I would have known half the cool films like, The 10th Victim if it hadn't been for Ann Magnuson. But I have to say just one thing, not to digress, but, Glenn and all of you guys who knew from the scene, Glenn was like the prince on the scene, and like what happened was oftentimes because of his largesse. And thank you very much, Glenn, man. You were a saint. So anyway.
True.
Yeah, true. So getting back to the Canal Zone party, when we put this show together, I just have to say, I was hanging out with a good friend, Stan Pescott, who's an English artist. I knew him through the Tubes, which I was a part of back in California.
Most of what happens in New York that's good comes from England, I have to say.
Sorry? Oh, yeah, some things, yeah. And I was just reading in the Village Voice a little article about something so prescient. It was about a crew called the Fabulous Five, who a little blurb that said, "We will come to your office or your place of business or your residence and actually do giant burners," which was so far ahead because the idea in 1979 that that graffiti artists or aerosol artists were going to do burners inside as almost like a fine art exercise or expression was way ahead and very prescient. And that's when I first saw Fab Five Freddy's name. He was representing the Fabulous Five, including Lee Quiones. I called him up. He came over. We were hanging out. We started talking, and we put together this party in which I got to meet Jean-Michel Basquiat and Stark Gray. Freddie met Jean at that night. So many interesting things happened.
Quinones was there, right? Lee was there.
Lee was there, of course. I interviewed these cats all on video, which is kind of exciting. But as that party's continued, and I was introduced to hip-hop through Freddie and started to kind of take my own tack, which was maybe more into dance. And a couple of years went by, but we were still having these parties. And Malcolm McLaren was a friend of Stan Pescott's. I met Malcolm at one of these parties, and Stan said, "Yo, you should meet Michael. He's involved in this new movement that's really happening uptown." Again, we didn't call it hip-hop at this time. This would have been like 1980, 81, the summer of 81. And
Fred called it hip-hop.
Sorry?
Fred was the first person to use the word hip-hop to me. And I still have the record, Count Cool Out. And it's written in very grand style. This is a good example of a new musical form, hip-hop. And that had to be 80?
Yeah, it was all about 80, you're right.
We called it a lot of things. Uptown Culture Jam, boing. I mean, we called it until it didn't really stick until I'd say 82. But anyway, that's an opinion. But what was about Malcolm McLaren was Malcolm knew Stan Pescott from the Royal College and from the 60s. And I had this opportunity to take Malcolm to the Bronx River Community Center where Bambaataa was spinning, Jazzy J, Ike C on the mic, the whole Zulu Nation. And it was this tipping point, I think, in that Malcolm invited me to put together a show to open up for Bow Wow Wow, who was performing in September of 81. So this would have been like in June or July. And then September of 81, I had this opportunity to present to a paying audience all these elements of hip-hop, not just music, not just DJ, turntablism and MCing or rapping, but graffiti art and dance, the Rocksteady crew, a number of different people. And then Ruza Blue happened to be there because she knew Malcolm and invited me to sort of bring my sort of review, if you will, to her spot called Negril, which she had sort of inherited from Cosmos, who was the manager of the Clash. It's a Thursday night at this club called Negril, and I remember that opening night. Freddie was on the mic, Futura was on the mic, High Priest Nick Taylor was on the reel-to-reel, Jazzy J was on the turntables, Bambaataa was on the turntables, Ram LZ had his graffiti up, Rocksteady
way
crew
too
was
crowded.
dancing. Sorry?
I said, and it was way too crowded.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was one of those first times that hip hop had a home on a regular basis downtown, and it's sort of with Ruza Blue's vision, Fab Five Freddy's help, Phase 2's help, et cetera, people like that. She then brought it to the ultimate launching pad, which was, the Roxy. But I'll tell you, without Freddie, I don't think any of this would have happened, at least not in the timing, in the way that it did. It would not have happened.
Yeah, so over to Fred again. A nice cue, thank you. Fred, I mean, we've seen a lot of Jean-Michel, who was like one of the, there were so many kind of, fascinating, compelling figures on this scene. I'd say all of them feeding off of each other, really. I'm convinced that Eno's concept of senius, which is an alternative to genius, comes from this moment, the idea that it's not really individuals who make great art, it's scenes that help produce great art. So a guy that we haven't spoken about tonight, but I think we should do, is Keith Haring, who you had a great friendship with as well. Could you tell us about how Keith kind of came through the party scene, was shaped through the party scene, how you went partying with Keith?
Yeah, well, once I became acclimated and had made a few friends, and the East Village was our kind of place where we all moved. And I think the first time I met Keith, before we got to be friends, anybody that knew him well, he had these kind of real interesting glasses that every other day he would paint the frames of these glasses, like with just like a bright, crazy color paint. It might be blue with yellow polka dots or red with green stripes, and it'd be this guy, and the paint got really thick. I remember seeing him one day and going, wow, those are weird glasses. And then when we actually meet, it's a funny story. We were at the Times Square show, which was this really big art show in 1980 in a former, well, they were known as massage parlors back then, but they were really whorehouses in the Times Square area. And it was a building, in the whole building, in I think about 40th and...
I believe they've gone now, right?
I think the building is probably a high rise, like so many other
parlors in Times
Has
Square.
the word Trump on the top.
Yeah, ooh, we'll stay away. But anyway, big art show in this 1980 in this former massage parlor with dozens of other cool artists, and it was on the front page of the Village Voice, and I got to be a part of the show along with Lee Quinones. We did a painting outside. I had two of my paintings on the inside, and I had just hung the paintings up on the wall in this room, and Lee and I were standing back looking at the installation, and this guy comes in the room and looks at us and says, you guys need to know that Fab Five Freddy did this painting, and he's, with Lee, and he's a part of the Fab Five, and I'm looking at this guy like, wow, this is weird, some kind of joke, and he didn't know actually who I was, and somebody walked in and said, well, Fred, are you happy with your paintings? And Keith, he flushed a bright shade of red, and anyway, we laughed it off, and we became really tight, and Keith had been very curious about seeing graffiti, from the trains to the walls, and we were both just trying to be painters and trying to insert ourselves into the popular culture, and we just became good buddies. And Keith was thinking hard about wanting to figure out a way to be a part of what was going on in the streets of New York. He had a great sensibility, he had great instincts, just a really nice, fun guy, and then obviously he would eventually figure out some of his drawings. He came up with that little crawling baby. I remember he was really excited, like, oh, you gotta show this to you. And he was able to just put it in little places like it was a little baby. And from there, it just exploded and he just developed and built on that.
Well, thank you. So, I remember you telling me this fantastic story about taking Keith to the Paradise Garage, and there was sort of supposed to be this disconnect, and I think it still exists in people's mind, between the kind of the art punk scene and the hip hop scene, which kind of learned to kind of have this amazing communication with each other. But then there was this whole other dance, kind of marathon DJ dancer scene, which was, taking root and exploding really at places like the Loft and the Paradise Garage, and I was kind of really compelled by understanding that there was a lot more interaction with this side of things than maybe had previously been understood. Johnny, I was wondering if you were one of the people within this art punk scene who really kind of was always connecting with the Loft and the Garage. We haven't really heard it's much about that tonight, and it often isn't talked about in discussions about downtown. But for me, and I think maybe for you, that this is just as much of a thriving, flourishing, synergistic downtown culture as anything else that was going on at the time. Can you tell us about the Loft and the Garage?
Well, I remember going to the Garage with Keith, and I would leave a lot earlier than he did. He would stay till the bitter end. But the thing about New York that's so great is, she's so big and so, diversified. There's everything here. When I go to smaller cities, smaller places, there'll be one club and it'll be there for 40 years, and they're doing the same thing every Friday night. It's this or that, and it's been there forever. The thing about New York is clubs change. They change. The city changes. I love that. And back then, there would be a scene. There would be the punk scene, CBGBs and Maxes, say. But they were totally different. They had different personalities. There was the Squat Theater, which had a whole different personality. You had the Garage and the Loft, and Zanzibar, and Better Days. These were all kind of after-hours dance clubs, but each one had a separate personality, AKA DJ. And I was more of a garage person. That was where I kind of fell in. But once in a while, I would go to the Loft with this friend of mine, Jose, and I would go there, and you would hear the same records that Larry played at the garage, but hearing these records at the Loft was a whole different thing. And going to Better Days and hearing them, or Zanzibar, it's like where you heard this song could be totally different.
Thanks.
I'd just like to point out that Better Days and the places that he talks about, those were largely gay clubs at that time, there was all different kinds of disco and dance music going on. Not the commercial form of disco. Street people just called it disco. And so I remember when I first got to go to the garage, I was like, well, I'm not gay. I was still living in Brooklyn. I wasn't on the scene. And there was a family that lived across the street from me that were like, listen, and this was the big secret about the garage, like if you were a straight male, if you were not like freaked out at guys dancing with guys, which was, for a lot of people, was the first time you would see this, then the girls that were there were the coolest girls in New York. So if the girls saw that you were like not gay, but not freaked out, then you got to meet the hottest chicks. So...
Okay, you've just told the biggest secret to the whole world right now.
There we
okay,
go. And so that was like an encouragement. I'm like, wow, that's really different. And when you went to the garage and just the experience, it's really one of those things where it's great to, I struggle to try to articulate just really how amazing it really was in that room, what they did with the lights, the sound system. It was so, so state-of-the-art and above and beyond anything then and anything now, because they had this very specific thing that they were doing, like they served no alcohol, which was like weird, but people had a lot of up drugs and some kind of mild psychedelics, which were sold up and down that block. So it was a kind of a thing. It was the whole model for everything in EDM and rave culture. All of that stuff is a direct line to the garage. And so I believe Friday night was the night that was
Friday
a bit
was
more.
Friday was
kind of mixed. It was straight. Well, straight people definitely was a
well,
nice
the Saturday night crowd said Friday was straight.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And so one night we were hanging out, and Keith had begun to hear about it. And I said, well, yeah, Keith, I've been. And he's like, and then the thing about the garage was like, you had to have a membership. If you didn't have a membership, you literally would hang around outside and ask members if they would take you in with them, because it was a serious treat. And so Keith and I went, we hung outside, we grabbed some mushrooms at this spot that, buddy of mine on St. Mark's Place, so we were ready, and hung out. Saw somebody cool, they took us in, and the way you'd go into the garage was really dramatic and exciting. There was like this long, it was like a garage, literally, had been a garage. It's unfortunately a FedEx garage now. It should be, a shrine immortalized. And they had like runway lights that went up this dark ramp, and it was just exciting. And the music,
like you were taking off.
Like you were taking off, but literally you felt this amazing vibration from the bass. No sound system was close anywhere, and you just feel this rumbling like an earthquake. And you got to the top of that ramp, you like paid whatever it was, and then you went in, and it was like unbelievable. And Keith and I, we went in, we danced, it was just amazing, it was soaking wet, and we danced all night, and Keith was just elated. And he was like, so we, danced until the morning, the sun was up when we left, and I think later that week, Keith was like, I gotta meet these people, I have to figure this out, and he would eventually do that. By that point, he had begun to exhibit, he had some press, his work was kind of beginning to be known, And within 2 weeks, I think I went back to the garage in 2 weeks. Keith had then done murals all around the interior of the garage. He had completely enmeshed himself in the whole family that ran that place. And it made it really good for all of us, because when people like Grace Jones would have big performances for like Slave to the Rhythm, when that record came out, which had been played at the garage for 2-3 months prior, it would be built to like this exciting fever pitch. And those acts that had big records would debut their first New York performance at the garage, which was, you have to be there. And because Keith had become so much of a part of it, I remember me and Jean-Michel went together, and we were able to get up into what was the VIP room, which was Larry's DJ booth, and we made it, and it was all going down. And, you know, Keith had painted Grace with these tribal markings, and it was just a memorable moment. Wish you were there, all of you. I'm sorry. So sorry. Damn. Who was there? You were there? There we go. You were there. He was there. He was there. There we go.
And, you know, a little known, something that's not that well known, is Zulu Nation guys were going down to the garage to get sound system tips from Richard Long and Larry
Yeah.
Jones.
So Richard Long was literally like a genius on a par, like a Steve Jobs level with sound. He was an acoustical engineer who did his best work on the garage's sound system, which, you know, he'd just do things to the ceiling so the sound moved in interesting ways. And I think I even saw an article where when they built the floor, at one point, you know, the garage would periodically close for several months, and they'd be doing these major, like, alterations. And I think at one point they put sand and built the floor on top of sand. It did something amazing.
Well, you know, it's like I was saying earlier, they were inventing all this stuff, which is really important in the garage. Richard Long and all these people, there was no such thing as like what we have today. You know, the mixers and all, you know, crossovers and all these things. They were inventing it.
So I want to try and go to the audience for questions in just a bit. Two more, Anne and then Patti. Anne, so one of the things we've talked about, and I think is very important, is that, you know, when New York City of the 70s and early 80s is portrayed, it's portrayed as this dysfunctional city where the services aren't running, the garbage is piled high, you get mugged in the street, or if you're unlucky, you get murdered.
That was all true.
And yet, if it was all true, and New York was such an unlivable city, it also seemed to be true that when I spoke to you and when I spoke to pretty much 129 other people, they said that they couldn't bear to leave the city, even for a single night, for fear of missing some essential party. So it can't have been that unlivable.
Well, it was unlivable for the people we were all trying to get away from.
Exactly.
Who
different,
people
right?
who took over the city since.
Who have since taken over.
Who have since taken over. It was very livable because you didn't have to get it real. The rents were so cheap, and if you had the guts to, you know, walk up the staircase and not get, you know.
To fight NYU students.
Yeah, not fight NYU students, and as long as you had your A200 bottle ready, and I mean, it gave a lot of, you gave up a lot of comfort in order to have total freedom. I did not want a boss. I did not want a usually male authority figure telling me what to do or what I couldn't do. That was the main thing. And one thing that I do know about downtown, there were a lot of women who were, you know, doing their thing. Ellen Stewart at La MoMA, Patti Astor in her, you know, reinventing the movie star, reinventing the film.
Anya Phillips hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, tonight.
Anya Phillips, who was, always scared me. But she was formidable. I mean, these were strong, powerful women. Lydia Lunch, who just blew my mind.
Tina Lahotsky.
Terrence Sellers, Patti Smith, Debbie Harry. So, and by the way, I just wanted to interject one more time that I was introduced to 10th Victim by Susan Hannaford and Tom Scully, who programmed most of the films at Club 57. And Susan was another strong woman who was very much of a force downtown. And so, you know, that was another thing that was very appealing to it, is that you could chart your own territory. You could open up a storefront like Patti did with the Fun Gallery and start your own business. I mean, it was the American way. Don't tread
Started
on-
the East Village Art Movement. There were no galleries until
Yeah.
Patti opened the Fund. A year later, there were 100 galleries.
No galleries for graffiti artists, and
Patti was the first that gave us our first solo shows. Thank you,
So
Patti.
because it was rather bombed out. Because it was a desolate, forgotten wasteland, then the sky was the limit. You could recreate anything you wanted, and all the trash was out there for the picking, you know, and all the clothes in the thrift store cost $1 or a quarter,
right.
and it was the greatest things. You know, I would go to the Salvation Army and get like 5 huge bags, and then a couple of weeks later, take the bags back and get a new set of bags. And just seeing the guys in the movie having all those great old coats from the 40s and the 50s, and that stuff was there nobody wanted it, so there was a lot of treasure in the trash. There were fairy godmothers in the bag ladies.
Patti,
Glenn got that right. There was magic there in that, among the rats and the
Patti,
hypodermic needles.
Patti, just one last question before we go, hopefully, to the audience. And I'm sort of loath to kind of, give you the downer question. But something starts to change in 1983 and 1984, and you're at the Fun Gallery, so you're at the heart of the downtown art scene of bringing together downtown artists and kind of uptown and Brooklyn graffiti artists. Something starts to change around the marketplace in 1983, around real estate, around Wall Street, around prices, around money coming in. I think we do need to acknowledge that 1983 is the year that AIDS becomes this hasn't been mentioned yet. We've been just dwelling on the nice things, I think. AIDS becomes an epidemic in 1983, 1984 crack reaches epidemic proportions. All of this kind of commingling and openness and cohabitation and exploration that has been defining this early 80s period, a period that barely has a name and celebrates not having a name because that's a means to freedom. Can you tell us how you remember things starting to shift for you?
Well, I think, first of all, talking about the beginning of the Fun Gallery was a total accident, okay? Neither Bill or myself. I knew Bill from the Mud Club, and at this point, my apartment on East 3rd Street, right across from the men's shelter, which was this whole block of what we used to call bums. Everyone lived there. We called it the Street of the Stars. John Lurie, Tina Lahotsky, because there were these city apartments that were $65 a month. And so everybody got them. Eric Mitchell, Bill Rice, everybody lived there. So that was another little communal thing. And I had met, I think what was really great about, both punk rock and the whole rap culture is everything was portable. You could your boombox, that's it. You got a party anywhere you want to go. The breakdance guys would just come, and I remember when Leo Castelli made his first visit, because we had then when we moved to the second Fun Gallery, and we had a big backyard, and Leo Castelli made his big entrance in the Fun Gallery, and there was all these kids there, and they to do an homage, they turned on their boombox and did a breakdancing exhibition for Leo. He was really impressed. But it was kind of, we had that whole creative thing going, and what really drove people crazy about me and Bill, because very early on, because the art world, you have to realize at the beginning too, is very rapacious. There was a lot of money around. It was the early 80s stock boom, and so as soon as, because we started to get dealers down there. I remember, remember when, we had Fred show at the, it was the second official show at the Fun Gallery. Kenny called it the Fun Gallery, and Fred wanted to make it the Serious Gallery. And so Fred got serious.
Well, the concept was Patti said all the artists could change the name of the gallery, so.
Yeah, it was supposed to be the Artist Gallery, and which I did, but the whole thing of redoing the logo every month just got a little bit too much. So of course Fred gets, he has a show, and the original Fun Gallery was 8 feet by 25 because I told Bill I had to have wall-to-wall carpeting, and so I measured it. But so Fred gets, I'm sitting there. We're open on Sunday afternoons from 3 to 6, and this huge limo pulls up outside, and it's Fred's show. Okay. And this guy that gets out, it looks like Goldfinger, and he has two babes on either arm, and he comes in, and he starts like grilling me about all these artists, and what do you think of John Michel, and who are the best graffiti artists, and all this. And, like, and, trying to tell him. And then Fred shows up, and you and Bruno and the babes, I guess, in the limo, went to the Jackie Curtis drag queen coffee shop. It was diagonally across, so that must have caused a sensation. And then another artist that we did have, and I just have to say that the special thing about the Fun Gallery is that everyone got a one-man show. We didn't differentiate between graffiti art or regular art or fine art or whatever kind of artist, but it had to be the best. And so everyone got a one-man show, and that's how we did end up having the first solo shows of graffiti artists, because they were separate people. I mean, Futurist painting was quite different from Fred's, and so on and so forth. So it was very early on, and then all of a sudden, like, these Soho dealers are trying to stab me in the back and steal my artists and all of this, and so it became, the business was expanding, and I think around the third year, the Fun Gallery was in existence from 1981 to 1985, and around the second, even the third year was when it was really started to happen. I say water finds its own level in the Soho, like money, because they smelled money in the water. And so these, people that were really like in the art business, because Bill and I just never cared about money. It used to drive people nuts. They just couldn't process it. And but then these people started coming down and renovating these tenement storefronts into one, like, we're spending $100,000 to redo these storefronts now into like little mini Soho galleries, so that the experience would become, more comfortable. And there was quite a few. I mean, they tried to exploit some of my artists, and in one case seriously ruined someone's career, who I'm happy to say is doing very well right now. But there was, this change in the air. Like I said, when the St. Mark's Cinema turned into the Gap, I knew it was time to go. And also there was the epidemic of AIDS. One of the very first person, and he's in this film, Gordon Stevenson, a punk rock filmmaker, was the first person to die of AIDS. And it just started to kind of come out of nowhere. No one knew what was happening. And I think, there was the combination of the gentrification and the AIDS epidemic, and it became, I don't think people can picture what it was like now, but it was so serious. There was just hundreds of funerals. And Klaus Nomi, who I appeared with on TV Party, he was a pastry. He sang an aria for Madame Butterfly, demonstrated his pastry chef works, and I don't know what I did. I was sitting around running my mouth as usual. And Klaus was another one to go very early. We had a Fun Gallery artist ourselves, Nicholas Moufarage, who was treated horribly. By this time, I had acquired the Fun Mobile. I got Bill in a Week MoMA, which is this, I think it was like must have been what was it? It was a 78 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. So the thing was like 25 feet long, and it was really great to drive around. Canvases in, but one day, someone poured sugar in the gas tank. And I also remember even when the first business type galleries came in, I went around one night and wrote "Yankee Go Home" in soap on all the windows. Yeah. So it just became, I always say, like, it's better to leave the party before it's over. And so it was just time to go. I think it was a really unique, I think all of us share that feeling that it was a unique, moment And you could just see that the gentrification and, you know, the death of like every single person that we knew did draw a curtain.
If I can interject as well, I just want to say one thing that in some ways, we were victims of our own success because it's hard to understand if you weren't in New York before like the late 70s. This town was a ghost town. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. All industry had left. Rents were cheap, not because there was a lull in real estate, but because the city was dead. It was over. It was over. People were looking to other cities, other regions to develop businesses and whatnot. It was like Berlin in the 90s. You know, we could do anything we wanted because the city was dead. And so think about this. You know, between this Belle Epoque, so characterized by Downtown 81, Wild Style, everyone here, this Belle Epoque that happened from the late 70s to the mid 80s. That revitalized at least downtown New York, that made it exciting, that got us into People magazine, that did all these things, you know, it drew people that wanted to come here, and they didn't realize they had to throw a party. They didn't realize that they had to do what we did, which was put on a show. They thought the show was here already. But the point is I think in many ways, our success as artists, as scenesters, if it maybe was a catalyst or an agent of change in terms of the real estate market. I mean, it certainly happened in Soho. Soho became what it became later on because of us, because of artists. It's the East Village, et cetera. It's very possible that New York is probably one of the most expensive cities in the world because of people like us. And now we can't afford to live here anymore.
Let's build a wall.
So
When I see those 100-story buildings, I think, prisons.
I hear Athens is really happening now. No, I did, from a curator here. Because it's cheap.
and
'Cause
Detroit,
it's
and
like
Detroit.
austerity, folks.
So I want to.
It's
It's
good for
it's been fantastic. I have a sense that we could talk long into the night, but I do want to go to the audience just to kind of open it up a little bit. I know that Jim Forat was very keen to say something, but I can't spot Jim. Jim, are you here? I just can't see. Jim, make yourself known. Stand up. I actually can't see anything from up here, really. So let's just
Shout out to
randomly.
Tom Silverman and Monica Lynch,
Can you just
by the way.
find someone who wants to speak? And
I am sorry for that. I have to tell you something. I come from Uruguay, and when you was doing all that struggle in your life in becoming so creative, I was 10 years old. And if it wasn't for your effort, for your ideas, I was still living in a ghetto in Uruguay. Your guys, your generations changed my life. I live in Rome. I work with artists. I work with DJs. Thanks to you. If it wasn't for you, I wasn't here. You are the generations who saved my life. Between hip hop, graffiti artists, the punk scene of New York too, and the movies. He's a guy with the white style t-shirt. That movie changed my life. All you guys changed my life. Thank you for that, because if it wasn't for you, I would still living in a ghetto. Thank you.
thank you very much. Do we have another question or another comment? I can now see Jim, but no. Okay, just at the back there.
Okay. Hi. I just have to ask, what do you think are the best parties now?
Battle Hymn on Sunday is really fun.
Okay, can you write that down? My phone died. Let's write that. What else? Everybody, this is an open question.
The loft's still going.
The Loft, okay.
I hate to say it, but dinner parties.
Is it Mr. Fung?
Am I the only one still going out?
Right?
No.
I only go out when I'm invited to kind of something that I know is going to be special and fun and the right music. Unfortunately, I mean, Battle Hymn, and Johnny is obviously an active DJ, but there's, we had this guy that was the mayor who's one of Donald Trump's right-hand men, Rudy Giuliani, and yeah, right. So when he was the mayor, he was a big part in ruining club culture in New York by enforcing laws that nobody paid attention to. So he made it really difficult at a point in the 90s that ruined it for you guys. So
Yeah, amen.
showbiz.
He gets too much credit, I think.
I mean,
he was bad, but I think he gets too much credit.
What about the bottle clubs?
Yeah, okay, when we had Jackie 60, I can tell you, we started, our rent was...
One of the last really cool clubs. Yes.
But our rent when we started was $4,000, and then it went to 40. And I can't even imagine what it is now.
That's in the meatpacking district before it became what it is now, when still meat was being moved around throughout the city, was in that area.
Right. How can a club make a living? How can you sell $7 drinks? That's why we closed, because we kept our drink prices $7, $8. We did not want, $11, $12, $15, $18 cocktails. But that's what these clubs have to do. And, I think Giuliani gets too much credit for destroying.
But, music changed. And I think the way the music changed compared to what we rocked to in the day, music definitely, for me, put a damper on going out. The way,
Well, I think music, you're right, I can understand it, but music always changes. I think the cool thing about the scene which we did our thing on, particularly me, you, when we would go in the clubs, we would influence DJs, and when they saw us in, they would be like, oh, there's Jean, there's Michael, there's Fab, like, let's play James Brown, let's play this, as opposed to something out of England that was supposed to be the thing. So I think we were able to influence...
and we DJ'd ourselves,
Yeah, or DJ ourselves, or tell them, yo, play this, because that other stuff is corny. So we were able to make it fun and then help influence what DJs played. And I'd like to add, Johnny Dynell was one of the first people I met downtown that actually not only knew about rap music, he had made a record that had rapping in it. Very early on, Jam Hot, which got played on the radio even. I was like, I can't believe Johnny Dynell.
And also, there are people right now who are 20 years old having like the times of their life.
In Brooklyn.
And well, wherever. It's like, I hate to say, some of them are moving to Joshua Tree, where we go to get away from everybody. But they're all over the world, and, we just don't know about it because we're old.
I just like to say that I used to go out every night, and I still would, but the times that I'm lucky to have a young and beautiful fiance who's taken me to a lot of clubs in Brooklyn with her friends, and I've had an amazing time at certain spots there where they do throw down on 45s, vinyl, whatever. But I'll tell you one thing, Monday nights, Mobile Mondays in Manhattan.
That's a great party.
And that's all 45s, and that's all old school music, so that's right on the Bowery and 4th Street.
Thank you. I know Jim now was Jim in the middle there, wants to ask a question. Stand up, Jim, so they can see you. Great.
It's nice to see all of you people up on the stage.
I just want to say Jim Forat is a legendary guy from this scene. Transformed Hurrah and turned it into the first really happening rock discotheque.
It's nice to see all the people still alive in the room. And I will tell you that there's a couple of things that didn't come across that I want to, which I'm sure you would agree with me, but one of the things that really characterize the downtown, and downtown is not just a geographical location, because downtown is now Williamsburg, downtown is the furthest stop out on the L train. I know there's got to be an N, but it's an attitude. It's a community. There's a reason why we had door policies at most of these places. It's a reason why most of the places were really not big, huge places. There were where a lot of dance clubs became huge. The Roxy, for example, or places like that. They were intimate, where people got to know each other and collaborate together. I think of Paul Salama, a bunch of women that couldn't sing were fantastic, you know, for example. And I say couldn't sing in a very, you know, sort of Leonard Cohen way. I go out a lot, and I go out a lot on the L train, you know, and the place like the Owl, a small little place that musicians have started that numbers of people perform in. There's a little supper club that's like Reno Sweeney's on 2nd Avenue called Pangea, which has maybe some of the people in this room might like the kind of music that they're playing. It's more cabaret, experimental. It's sit down. So I think computers, social media, MTV, crack, heroin, and AIDS killed for some period of time nightlife. Now what's killing it most is real estate and rents. That's why you have people further and further out. I don't know what's going to happen when the L train stops. But the sense of community and collaboration, just the bands that were in this movie, by the way, the movie sounded great in this room. It looked beautiful, you know. When you can have a Tuxedo Moon and a DNA and a Kid Creole and Suicide, you know, coming in with the most beautiful love song in the world at the end of it, you know, I don't want people to be nostalgic for what we had when we were young, and I don't want young people to think that they missed out or they can't find. It's really learning from the people on the stage about make something, you know? Go to Transpico, you know, where David Linton has a lot of the sort of kitchen-like music that we used to know back then. There's just so many scenes. You know, there's a lot of queer clubs now, one-nighters that are great parties. And they call it queer now. We used to call them gay. But all are welcome because it's about attitude. It's about attitude. It's about attitude. And I will tell you, Freddie, you sort of touched on it. It was always the secret of my clubs that everyone could get laid if they wanted to, but no one got harassed. No one got their pussy snatched. No one got beat up. No, I'm serious. This was like, you know, and I think that you have to find those places or make them yourselves.
Thank you, Jim. I just want I think, okay, we'll take a quick comment and then maybe one more question down here and then we'll go and party or something. Or eat.
This is the first time I've seen this film, and this is a great venue. And there are two no-wave bands, DNA and James Chance. And I wonder, Glenn, and what is your name? What is your name next to Patti? Yeah. You're the missing link between no-wave and hip-hop, I just realized. Right? Wasn't Gray sort of described as wasn't Gray also described or as no wave?
Yes, absolutely.
And
we were
then
no
you
wave.
got into hip hop.
It wasn't. We were not. I think there. If we were a missing link, there were a number of missing links.
No, you said that you opened up for Bow Wow Wow with
Something else.
No, that was a hip-hop review, the Zulu Nation Throwdown it was called. And that incorporated dancers, graffiti artists, DJs, rappers.
And were you involved with that?
Yes.
Right, that's why I said that.
But not as a musician.
But not as a musician,
but
as
that's
an impresario.
fine. That's fine. There's still a connection there.
Can't
But during that time...
Can't we put these categories to rest once and for all?
Well, no... Why? No wave
because what does no wave mean? I mean, you know, that doesn't mean anything. This film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2000. And it was in a big theater, and I had a tuxedo on. And I went in, and I'm watching it, and I'm kind of nervous. And then DNA comes on. And about 10% of the people in the theater left. And I thought, wow, it still works.
Yeah. Well, what I want to get across or to ask you to talk about is how important it was back then and how relevant it was in 1980 and 81, these bands and this sort of no-wave aesthetic. You know, I'm sorry if you don't like labels, but, you know, I've heard labels all night. Disco, hip-hop, punk rock, so, you know, let's add no wave. I'm just, you know, genuinely
What I've heard on that note is the idea that, at least personally, at least for Gray, that someone told me that we helped sort of lay the foundation for break beats, and some of those ideas. I'm not even sure what break beats means actually, but you know, we were doing these ideas of absurdist, you know, abstract, surreal music and sound. And I think that there's an element of that in music, but there were people doing it, you know, a lot before, you know, Stockhausen and This Heat, and everyone remember This Heat, that Blue album, amazing, you know, John Cage. We were just sort of carrying on a tradition, and I suppose it kind of made sense that it slipped into a very electronic sound, electronic dance music sound, and kind of bypassed formal. So hip hop in a way was basically, you know, opening the door to the producer, if you will, and closing the door sort of to the musician, and we kind of played a role in that as well. That makes sense.
The main reason for genres of music being labeled and named is so that they could be placed in the right bin in the record store. And so, you know, we really don't have record stores anymore, so it's okay to blend genres now, which real artists are always trying to break out of a confines anyway, so.
I want to bring in one more question, one final question from Karen, I think it is. Sorry. And whilst the mic is coming over, I just want to say that one of the things that there may be some names flying around tonight, but the thing that defined the early 1980s was that people were not naming what's going on, or if they were giving it a name, it had about 8 names, because trying to capture this music in a name was almost impossible. And it was being made and consumed almost largely in New York. It wasn't about a national, international market. Karen.
Yes, nice pop there. Just wanted to ask Ann if she could discuss a little bit about the fun and the vibrancy and the freedom at Club 57 and the kookiness and the whatever you wanted to wear and the, you know, grandma's, you know, meatballs and TV dinners and shit like that. You know, just the fun that was.
Florence Henderson chic.
Yeah, you know.
Well, I think Club 57 was a place where, because of maybe in spite of or because of the bleakness of the environment, that we wanted to bring as much color and fun and joy into our lives. But the excitement for me was meeting up people who thought the way I did and liked the music I did and wanted to dance and just wanted to live our lives and love each other and express this gift of life. And I think Club 57 was an opportunity to create immersive theater every night and to be the characters that you watched in the movies that you grew up watching and the music you listened to, and to be the people you dreamt of being. And you know, just
And it was affordable. What was it, like?
It was
$3 or
affordable.
$4
It was like
a
$1,
night?
$2 to get in. Nobody was turned
Plus
away. It did get cliquish, like everything else does. But
So when I was
served
when I was
soup.
good friends with Keith, and you know, because I was cool with Glenn and that whole scene, I was able to get into the Mud Club, and Keith was not able to get into the Mud Club, and he described Club 57 to me. He says, "Well, a lot of us can't get into the Mud Club, so we're going to do our own thing." And then I would go over to see what they were doing at Club 57. It was really fun. Like, they would have that monster movie night.
yeah, Tom and Susan had the Monster Movie Club. And,
Yeah, it was all these cool themes that felt like fun in the
The
basement.
Mud
of that
Club
little
could be
church.
very dark, and the Club
Yeah.
57 was crazy fun. It was stupid. It was great.
Goofy,
You know.
we really believed in the, well, I guess, you know, if Mud Club was heroin, we were mushrooms.
We were
Yes.
we were rival gangs in a way.
Mud
it was
Club-
like the
Mud
Sharks
Club
and the
was
Jets.
coke.
And I
The
think
Mud
it-
Clubbers and the regular Mud Clubbers and the regulars, the Club 57, we were kind of Sharks and Jets. We were like rival gangs.
A
in
little
way.
bit, but we were all kind
That's
of in
only
it.
if you've seen.
No, there was
that
some
movie.
competition. I mean, come
But I
on.
There
think,
was, but you know, once everybody started dying, we all came together
Yeah,
because we.
well, it was all in fun in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I
but-
think
Well,
a
it's when
big-
you started doing things like the Soul Party, and then you started doing things at the Mud. That's when it got.
I think you got
But-
your outfit at the Soul Party,
But it's
didn't
also, I think I just want to say it's important to know that a lot of what went on our scene, largely below 23rd Street, was we were reacting to what other things were. So if something was going on over there, and that's what that was, we wanted our thing to be different. And that's really just a reflection of the individuals that we were all very conscious about being. Like everybody was trying to be in a certain groove, but have their own flavor with it. You know what I'm saying? Not like that cookie cutter thing. And a reaction and a response to, like from Max's to CB's to the Mud Club, you know, to
It
Club
was very
57.
American. It was "Don't tread on me, baby," but we can dance. You can, you know.
Democratic and democratic.
And let's just freedom, total freedom, and don't tell me no. I'm going to do whatever I want to do.
Yes.
And I'm going to do it on $1 a day, damn it.
And on that note,
Thank you. On that note, I want to once again thank Ron and Sophie and MoMA for hosting this, fantastic evening.
Fun Gallery books will be on sale in the lobby. Thank you.
I want to thank you in the audience for sticking it out to the end of the party. And above all, I want to thank our, wonderful panelists for just taking us down to the early 1980s, but also reminding us about how what went on remains relevant today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim Lawrence, for doing all the hard
Great
work.
book, by the way. Great book. Congratulations.